Thank you, Dr. Ellensberg, for providing history of Sikhs in Bellingham and their forced expulsion. We can truly appreciate from the images and the rhetoric that contextualizes the struggles of the Sikhs in Bellingham. Just a reminder, after the last presentation, we'll be having questions. There are some cue cards and some cue cards going around if you want to put them on the chair, and we can bring them forward for the last 15 minutes. Our last presentation is Dr. Hugh Johnston, and he's a professor emeritus in history at Simon Fraser University, where he has been teaching since 1968 and continues to teach in the seniors program. He's the author of several books, including The Voyage of the Komagata Maru, The Sikh Challenge to Canada's Colour Bar, The Four Quarters of the Night, The Life History of an Immigrant Sikh, Radical Campus, Making Simon Fraser University, and Jewels of the Killa, The Remarkable Story of an Indo-Canadian Family. He's currently working on a biography of Kabir Singh, a Sikh pioneer, mill owner, and philanthropist. His paper today is on surveillance of Indian nationalists in North America from 1908 to 1918. Please welcome Dr. Hugh Johnston.
Thank you for the I just mentioned one thing about what I'm working on, the biography of Kabir Singh. That, in fact, is the same as Jewels of the Killa. So I'm not working on it anymore. I've quit. But if any of you are inclined to read it, that I would welcome. I did it so that it would be read, and I did it as another way of telling the story of the Sikh and Punjabi community here in British Columbia, and doing it through the experience of one family, but one family can indeed express a common experience. I'm very attached to that book, and every time somebody should choose to read it, I will be happy. Anyway, my thanks to Satnam Johal for the organization of this, and my thanks especially to Dr. Mann. I appreciate the invitation to be here and providing the facilities so that I can be here. I had previously enjoyed going down to Stockton, but I'm very happy about that. My topic, which you've heard, Dr. Mann gave it to me, and he gave it to me knowing full well that I had written an article in 1988. So for some of you, that'll seem like a long time ago. I mean, here it is, 1988. I think he expects that maybe I've learned something since then. And maybe I have. Now, Paul mentioned Inder Singh, and I don't know who your Inder Singh is, but I have a book here which has, you know it. It has actually quite a number of Inder Singhs in it. Which one is yours? Well, that would be a question mark. This book, there are people in this audience who will know what I'm waving around, but it is Struggle for Free Hindustan, Gadar Directory. And I have this in my possession thanks to Sohan Puni. He sent it over to me some time ago. I have another book here that I was given by the Vice Chancellor of Punjabi University on the one day I was on that campus, and he gave me this book, and it's a similar thing, the Gadar Directory. Now, the wonderful thing when a nation throws out its old rulers is you can then go into the files, especially the police files, which are generally hard to get into, and then you can print the whole thing. These are exact reproductions of books that were printed in India, one in 1917 and one in 1934, for internal consumption within the police. And they are nothing but biographies of people associated with the Gadar party. There's rich material there, and I can come back to that and to the nature of that material. But what was I going to say? Oh, I was thinking of when Sohn Pooney was speaking, and he spoke in English briefly. He was quoting the director of criminal intelligence in Delhi. The year was 1914. You're not nodding. But, roughly the quote was, the revolutionary movement began in Vancouver and then was superseded.
September 15,
1950, there I'm out. Right. I wasn't listening carefully enough. But superseded by San Francisco. And now that's very interesting, because in a way, what I wrote in that article in 1988 is something of a modification of that. When you go into police files, they're very interesting. You're getting information that you otherwise would not get. But the police are categorical thinkers. They want to put people into a specific box. In this case, they are definitely interested in finding revolutionaries and revolutionary activity. So when you read these biographies, read them with some sense of how complicated life really is. If you're in the middle of a very intense situation, your thoughts are running all the time. If you are in the middle of a community which is under a lot of stress, you need to be adjusting your behavior to that reality. I mean, I'd go way back in my family, and they were what were called United Empire Loyalists in the 18th century. And sometimes the king's forces were in control of their town in New York State, and sometimes the rebel forces were in control of their town. And if you went through what they said and did through all that, it was changing. It was definitely changing, and whether they were loyal or not, actually when the government came to investigate afterwards to see whether anybody deserved any compensation when they turned up in Canada, they arrived at 6 degrees of loyalty, depending on their behavior. I mean, there were the ones that never wavered all the way through, and there were ones we could barely count. That is reality. And the other thing is, when you're in a community and you're in a family, you need that family, you need that community, and you need to stand with them. But you're also fighting for your own individuality. You are somebody, you have your own thoughts. And you're under that tension all the time of balancing yourself with the need to stand together. Now, I have this book from Sohn Pooney because we talk, I'm not going to say frequently, we talk several times a year at length. And this has been going on for many years. And I like to say we share. And he shares what he knows, and I try to share what I know. And he very generously passes things like this on to me. And one of the things that I get a glimpse of from him is how proud one can feel of that first generation of Sikhs and Punjabis who came here. And I think of their success. I know that Sohan Puni thinks particularly of what a good number of them gave up for the sake of the collective whole of their people. And I have an understanding of that, and at the same time I'm seeing that they were trying to find their way through difficult times. So I read these police files and I realize the police all add it all up as it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like that, but it isn't like that at all. And on the theme of complexity, then, I come to the central figure of this article I wrote, who has been mentioned 2 or 3 times already this morning. His name is Hopkinson, W.C. Hopkinson. I see in print people refer to him as the atrocious Hopkinson, or other words like that. And I've been interested in him for a long time. Even within the last couple of years, I've come to know his story a little better. And I'm going to give a bit of it. I'll go back to what Sohan said about the revolutionary movement beginning. You didn't say it, you quoted. You quoted, beginning in Vancouver and then being superseded by San Francisco. Hopkinson was the investigator here whose reports and findings ended up in the police files in Delhi. Hopkinson started his work here, and he had been working here for a few years. He got permission to go across the border and down to San Francisco. So the police perception is that the revolutionary movement began in Vancouver and was superseded in San Francisco is directly related to Hopkinson's working here, finding stuff out, and then going down to San Francisco. The person that Hopkinson was most aware of from the start, he's been mentioned a couple of times, Draknath Das. He was up in Vancouver, then he was in Seattle, then he was in California. Hopkinson was anxious to have him thrown out of the United States, and that's why he went down to get information on him with the permission of the Canadian government. And while he was in San Francisco, he found out there was this guy, Hardial. And that was the evolution of the story, and that's the story that the police in India ended up with. I offer that just as for speculation. The kind of material that he was interested in, I'm going to go back. I'm going to just tell you who he was. Because he was an Indian. He was an Indian of mixed ancestry. This I've been aware of for a long time. When he was hired in the immigration department, he put his place of birth down as England. But his baptism certificate turns up in India. He was born in Allahabad. And it's evident that he was not just Anglo-Indian himself, he was from an Anglo-Indian family. By that I mean mixed race. Because there is the term Anglo-Indian which describes the Englishmen in India, but we're not talking about them. And many of you will know that the Anglo-Indians of mixed ancestry had a unique place within the society and government at the time. Because they weren't Indians to other Indians, and they weren't English to the English, but their futures and careers depended on the English. And they found futures in the police, I mean, very much in the railway department, but in the police, and there tended to be a ceiling for them, how they could go in promotion, just as there was for full-blood Indians. There was a ceiling under the British. So that was his background. Now, I didn't know. I knew that he was married to an English woman here in Vancouver. Her name was Nellie Fryer. She came from what we would call an upper middle class family. Her father was an auctioneer. They lived in Highgate, which is a prestige area of London. And she amazingly came to Vancouver on her own, and it was in Vancouver that she met Hopkinson and that they got married, and this within months of his arriving here. So that whole story is for the novelist to make out how they met, how he courted her, and then together they brought out her brothers and then her mother, and her mother came out with 2 servants, just to give you an idea. Now, people at that time you need domestic help in the home, but still, she's not coming from a poor working class family, and he was able to present himself here in Vancouver in a way that won her heart. So they had 2 children, and that's a little domestic scene here in Vancouver. Before he came to Canada, he had been married, and his wife had died. He had married, I presume, an Anglo-Indian girl, and within the year she died, and within months he came to Canada. And that's my explanation of why he came. He came following the tragedy of a death of a wife. And he came and started a new life. And one always wondered whether he had been sent by the British. He had been in the police in Calcutta. Was he sent here? No, it's quite clear he came on his own. And the timing of his arrival was interesting. It was in the second year of the 2 big years of Punjabi immigration. So he was almost in that. And then he had to work at whatever he could, but he was within 1 month making himself known in the immigration department, and then to very prominent people. And that would, the Deputy Minister of Labour, somebody coming from Britain on behalf of the British government to investigate the situation here. He made himself known, and then he was hired into this special position at the urging of the Governor-General of Canada. So he had made his presence known locally, and people from Ottawa knew him personally, and there he was. He was given a job in immigration specifically to conduct surveillance of the South Asian community. That was his purpose. Now, why were people aware that there were things to watch in that community? He was bringing it to their attention. To a considerable extent, he created a job for himself by raising the alarm about what was going on in the community. And he was aware of a few figures and brought that forward and ended up with a job which was largely concerned with that. Now, he got that job less than a year after the immigration of Punjabis was stopped. So it's very, very interesting to have an immigration officer for a group of people who are not allowed to immigrate. But that was the reality. He did other immigration work. And he did that until 1914, and it was undoubtedly as a consequence of what he was doing that he was shot in the Vancouver courthouse by Maiwa Singh, a member of this community. The surveillance went on, but it didn't go on as openly in the future. The chap administering it was sent from Britain, and he kept a very low profile. As a matter of fact, you get correspondence in Ottawa at the level of deputy minister, and they refer to them as the person whose name I should not mention. So they weren't risk of giving up that name, but the surveillance went on. And I'm going to conclude very quickly, but as I say, tremendous, it's not everything that's in the police files. The police files in India are coming from all kinds of directions. They're coming from consulates or embassies in Japan, or they're coming from China. They're coming from interviews of returned Canadian Sikhs in India. They're coming from interrogations. You know, they're coming from all directions, but there is this core here that does come from Vancouver, and for which Hopkinson is important. And he was like a vacuum cleaner, picking up everything he could, and he had his informants within the community who were bringing material to him all the time. One thing one should realize about him is he was not Punjabi. He did not grow up in Punjab, and if he understood Punjab, he did not speak it like a Punjabi, nor could he read Gurmukhi. That's all evident. But he had Punjabis working with him. And I have a letter from the lawyer who represented Maiwa Singh at his trial for the murder of Hopkinson. And this lawyer was making a last-ditch appeal for clemency for Maiwa Singh, which Maiwa Singh wouldn't make on his own. But the lawyer was trying to describe the sharp division that there was within the Punjabi community as a consequence of the group of people around Hopkinson, and then the temple leadership and the pro-revolutionary people who were here. And he said, you could see Hopkinson and his people moving as a body through the streets, down Hastings Street or whatever. So his impression was that the presence, the known presence of this surveillance work was a severe agitation within the community. So I go back to what you can find here. And I mentioned the book Jewels of the Kila, or I should say Kila, which is about Kapoor Singh. He was an immigrant to North America in 1906. He was one of the extremely successful people. He became a major mill owner on Vancouver Island and then right in the Vancouver area. And he was at the center of almost everything throughout. When he was in California, in Stockton, and in Victoria, and in Vancouver, he was not, I understand from his daughters, he was a shy man. He wasn't the man who was going to run up to the platform and start speaking, but he was definitely the man that people turned to support campaigns and petitions and efforts to represent the Sikh case here and back in India. So there he was. There is a long entry, comparatively long entry for him in one of these books, Gadar People. And that interested me because his daughter said to me, I didn't know my father was involved with Gadar, but Professor so-and-so showed me this book, and here's this long entry from the police. So that is a lesson on how we should approach this material, and you realize that it is collected for a purpose, and the police want to believe they're finding revolutionaries. More than that, Kapoor was sympathetic. So on one hand, he adopted the Gandhi's code of nonviolence. On the other hand, he supported Gadarites out of his own pocket. Some of his best friends were Gadarites, and again, I'm speaking against a categorical notion of what people thought, did, and how they behaved. And I have one last point, and we've mentioned Harnam. Someone mentioned Harnam Singh Suri. Sorry. And so he made the mistake of leaving Vancouver at one point, and then the Canadians wouldn't let him back. He left Victoria, and the Canadians wouldn't let him back across the border. And then eventually the Americans deported him from San Francisco, and he ended up in Burma where he was arrested, and then he's one of the Gadar martyrs who was tried and hanged. Important evidence against him was material that Hopkinson found in Harnam Singh's house in Victoria. This is after Harnam Singh had left. But something had happened that gave the police an excuse to go in, and they called Hopkinson, and they found brochures and pamphlets, and they actually found instruments for making explosives, and they found correspondence. Now, it's not a crime to be interested in how to conduct explosive experiments. Now, your politics may lead you to be more interested than others. You might be just interested from a purely scientific point of view. But strictly speaking, it's not a crime to conduct these experiments. And a point was made by others. When we were looking at things that are in the public library. You know, you just need to check a book out and you can find out how to do this. And then you get some test tubes and things. But they did find bomb-making apparatus. So in the Gadar directory, he is the bomb maker. They found correspondence. The correspondence was back all around the world, in fact, but he was writing to people in Paris. A large part of what he wrote concerned importing Swiss watches, because he thought that if his friend in Paris could get hold of some Swiss watches and they got them over here, they could make a good profit on them. He was a businessman. That side of him was a businessman. It was the evidence that Hopkinson collected, and it is of the nature that I described to you, that had him convicted and for which he was executed. And my feeling was that if he'd been brought to court here, he'd been charged here on these things, the case would have gone nowhere. Thank you.